Russell Marion Nelson Sr. is the 17th president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, having assumed the role in 2018. Before his leadership of the Mormon Church, he was a renowned cardiothoracic surgeon and medical researcher. Born in 1924, Nelson has emphasized the importance of following Jesus Christ, restructuring church programs, and building numerous temples worldwide during his tenure. But before we talk more about Nelson, I'm your host D-Days, and that's talent on loan from Kolob. I run the Mormon News Roundup, a contemporaneous LDS news show, and the Mormon movie reviews, where we take a look at old Mormon movies, and we premiere this content every Sunday and Monday nights at 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Nelson served as the Sunday School General President of the Church from 1971 to 1979. In 1976, President Nelson was invited to offer the invocation at the inauguration of W. Rolfe Kerr, who was to be installed as the president of Dixie State College in southern Utah on Friday, November 12, 1976. The Special Collections Library at Dixie State University still has digital copies of the inauguration of President Kerr. As you see, Nelson's name appears on the program as giving the invocation. So why should anyone care about Nelson giving a routine prayer at a university commencement?
I am glad that you asked.
One day before the inauguration, on Thursday, November 11th, Nelson boarded a SkyWest flight going from Salt Lake City to St. George, Utah. The flight experienced a minor mechanical problem and the plane landed in Delta, Utah as a precaution. The passengers were flown from Delta to St. George on a different aircraft. Ever since that precautionary landing, President Nelson has publicly shared his experience about this allegedly doomed flight as a miraculous escape from death aided by the Almighty. But important information gleaned from a Civil Aeronautics Board report seems to indicate that the near disaster Nelson referred to as a faith-promoting experience was not as serious as he indicated. We will cover that board report more near the end of this episode. I intend to discuss every mention I could find of Nelson's legendary flight in chronological order, including a short movie that he released memorializing the supposed miraculous flight. There is much more that meets the eye in this story. Let's get started. One of the first times this story was shared publicly was in 1979 in Nelson's book From Heart to Heart, an autobiography. This was the first of several autobiographies of Russell Marion Nelson. It's a hard book to come by since it was mainly printed just for his family. On page 376 of this book we read,
November 12th, flew to St. George, Utah, when one of the small airplane engines exploded. I expected to be killed, but after a precipitous dive in the disabled plane, the pilot made a safe emergency landing in Delta, Utah. I was going to St. George to give the opening prayer at the inaugural services at which Rolfe Kerr became president of Dixie College.
By 1992, Nelson had been ordained an apostle, and in this General Conference address, he opines more about this flight. LDS General Conference is a semi-annual event held by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where church leaders address members of the church worldwide. It usually takes place on the first weekends in April and October. The conference includes several sessions over 2 days with speakers from the First Presidency, the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, and other general authorities of the church.
I remember vividly an experience I had as a passenger in a small two-propeller airplane. One of its engines suddenly burst open and caught on fire. The propeller of the flaming engine was starkly stilled. As we plummeted in a steep spiral dive down toward the earth, I expected to die. Some of the passengers screamed in hysterical panic. Miraculously, the precipitous dive extinguished the flames. Then, by starting up the other engine, the pilot was able to stabilize the plane and bring us down safely. Throughout that ordeal, though I knew death was coming, my paramount feeling was that I was not afraid to die. I remember a sense of returning home to meet ancestors for whom I had done temple work. I remember my deep sense of gratitude that my sweetheart and I had been sealed eternally to each other and to our children, born and reared in the covenant. I realized that our marriage in the temple was my most important accomplishment. Honors bestowed upon me by men could not approach the inner peace provided by sealings performed in the house of the Lord. That harrowing experience consumed but a few minutes, yet my entire life flashed before my mind. Having had such rapid recall when facing death, I do not doubt the scriptural promise of perfect remembrance when facing judgment.
Notice that Nelson claims that both engines failed during the flight. The Friend magazine is an official publication of the LDS Church, specifically designed for children. It features stories, articles, and activities that teach moral values, gospel principles, and stories from the scriptures in an engaging and age-appropriate manner. Let's check out what Nelson said about his flight in a 1994 publication of The Friend.
I remember well an experience I had as a passenger in a small-to-propeller airplane. One of its engines suddenly burst open and caught on fire. The propeller of the flaming engine wasn't moving anymore. As we dropped in a steep spiral dive toward the earth, I expected to die. Some of the passengers screamed hysterically. Miraculously, the steep dive put out the flames. Then, by starting up the other engine, the pilot was able to get the plane under control and bring us down safely. Throughout that ordeal, though I knew death was coming, I was not afraid to. I remember a sense of returning home to meet ancestors for whom I had done temple work. I remember my deep sense of gratitude that my sweetheart and I had been sealed eternally to each other and to our children, born and raised in the covenant. The Lord has said, "Fear not even unto death, for in this world your joy is not full, but in me your joy is full." I realized that day that my marriage in the temple was my most important accomplishment. Honors bestowed upon me by men could not approach the inner peace provided by sealings performed in the house of the Lord.
Notice that in this last account that Nelson has now added fire and flames to the story. The next example I could find of Nelson talking about this story is an excerpt from The Gateway We Call Death. This experience was also quoted in his address in the April 5th, 1992 afternoon sessional general conference, which I shared just a little while ago. Next up, we have September 2004, in which President Nelson's story appeared in an edition of the Church News. The Church News is an official publication of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints that covers news, events, and developments related to the Church and its members worldwide. It serves as a source of information and inspiration, highlighting stories of faith, service, and church activities.
Elder Nelson spoke of a harrowing trip he once made on a small airplane. One of the plane's motors exploded an hour after takeoff, sending the aircraft into a spiral dive. The dive fortuitously doused the fire sparked by the explosion, and the pilot was able to regain control and land the plane safely.
Elder Nelson said he had expected to die in a stress plane, but he had lived a life of gospel harmony and felt prepared to meet eternal life. I was surprised that I was not afraid to die. I remained calm. Why? I knew that my wife and I had been sealed in the temple. We had been sealed eternally to each other and to our 10 precious children.
The new detail that Nelson adds to this account is the actual explosion of an engine. Fast forward to 2006, and we get this from the Deseret News.
Those who have lived to tell the tale about a brush with violent death often recount the horror of knowing they were about to die, as did a woman on a small plane with Elder Nelson several years ago. One of the engines blew up and the plane caught fire, sending it into a steep dive as they were en route from Salt Lake City to St. George. In the few seconds that passed before the pilot was able to shut off the fuel line and extinguish the flames, Elder Nelson recalls that his entire life passed through his mind, amid the hysterical screams from the woman in the next seat. I thought of the academic regalia, the tuxedos and awards banquets, and how insignificant it all seemed, he said, adding that an overwhelming feeling of calm came over him. What mattered in that moment were his life choices, he said, temple ordinances he had participated in, including marriage to his wife, and the deep assurance that though she would become a widow, She would be taken care of financially and they would be reunited after death. As it turned out, the plane made a safe, emergency landing.
More details have been fleshed out, including the idea of a violent death, horror, and now the dive is a steep dive. In November of 2011, we get Nelson's most famous retelling of this story. It was released as an inspirational message on the church's official YouTube channel. Nelson told his story once again, and the church made a video depicting the event. The title of the video is "Men's Hearts Shall Fail Them."
I was in a small airplane, and all of a sudden, the engine on the wing caught fire. It exploded, and burning oil was poured all over the right side of the airplane, and we started to dive toward the earth. We were spinning down to our death. Oh, this woman across the aisle, I just was so sorry for her. She was just absolutely uncontrollably hysterical. And I was calm. I was totally calm. Even though I knew I was going down to my death, I was ready to meet my Maker. We didn't crash. We didn't die. The spiral dive extinguished the flame. The pilot got control and started the other engine up, and we made an emergency landing out in the field. But I thought through that experience, if you've got a faith, you can handle difficulties, knowing that with an eternal perspective that all will be well. In Luke 21, the earth shall be in distress, nations with perplexity, the seas and the waves roaring, men's hearts failing them for fear. What we're seeing is a prediction that in these latter days, people will be afraid. Men's hearts are failing, and that includes women, because they forget their identity and their purpose. The heartaches will come. I've lived through the death of a wife and the death of a daughter. I've seen the troubles that divorce brings. Children or grandchildren go astray. Disability, illness, injuries. To the individual who is weak in the heart, fearful in the heart, be patient with yourself. Perfection comes not in this life, but in the next life. Don't demand things that are unreasonable, but demand of yourself improvement. As you let the Lord help you through that, He will make the difference. I'm so grateful for the gospel of Jesus Christ that allows me that kind of strength in these tumultuous times.
The short film that you just watched was intended to give encouragement for those who feel weak in the heart. In 2016, Emeritus General Authority Spencer Condi released another obsequious book devoted to singing the praises of Nelson, in which the Flight of Death appears. I decided not to purchase the book for this review, but maybe if you head on over to our Patreon site, my next video I'll be able to do so. A short time after President Nelson became the 17th president of the church, he once again referenced the story in a historic message to Dominican Latter-day Saints in Spanish. I've translated his remarks for you here.
He shared an experience from traveling on a small plane. One of the engines caught fire and exploded, sending the aircraft into a spiral dive. Many of the passengers began screaming in fear. But then a miracle happened. The speed of the fall extinguished the fire and the plane was able to land safely. President Nelson said he expected to die, but he was not afraid. He remained calm.
I knew my wife and I had married in the temple. We were sealed to each other and to our 10 beautiful children. I realized that our temple marriage was more important than any other achievement in my life.
President Nelson once again referenced the story to a crowd of 50,000 people in Safeco Field in Seattle, Washington in 2018.
This came clearly into focus years ago as President Nelson was traveling with 4 passengers on a flight from Salt Lake City to St. George, Utah. During the flight, one of the 2 engines exploded, sending the small plane into a downward spiral. President Nelson said he felt strangely calm.
Events of my life rapidly flashed before me. I thought about all the framed degrees, awards, and honours on my office wall and the various uniforms, tuxedos, and doctoral robes that I'd worn in my life.
In his dying moments, those honours meant nothing to him. What did matter was his wife and children to whom he was sealed in the Holy Temple.
Miraculously, the free fall extinguished the flames, he said. I plead with you not to let the temptations of the world, including the time-consuming allurements of your occupation, distract you from the real reason you are here on earth. Will you use your agency to choose Jesus Christ and his gospel?
This time, Nelson says that both engines have exploded. One wonders how a small aircraft could recover from such a violent event. Nelson once again referenced the doom flight in 2018 in a talk that he gave in Uruguay.
While speaking to the members of the church in Uruguay in Spanish during the devotional, President Nelson recalled a time in his life when the airplane in which he was traveling almost spiraled to the ground. But the plane did not crash and President Nelson's life was preserved for a season. With that time, we have the privilege to work, live, love, and choose, he said.
He also referenced it in a talk that he gave in Argentina in August of 2019.
Thousands of members and invited guests of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Buenos Aires, Argentina, Wednesday night learned from their prophet how to obtain a peace so profound it can keep them calm in the face of certain death. Spanish. Church President Russell and Nelson told of the time, several years ago, when he and others aboard a small plane survived the explosion of one of the plane's engines. The plane's ensuing fire and sharp nosedive toward the likely and then the pilot's miraculous emergency landing in a field after the speed of the dive extinguished the fire. President Nelson told the Argentinian saints of the unusual tranquility he felt as the plane spiraled toward the earth, and some aboard of what was ahead. The source of his peace, he said, was his faith and the death-transcending power of the Christ-focused worship done in the church's temples.
In none of these stories does he ever assist or comfort those around him. He also referenced it in an Easter message that he gave in March of 2021 that was reprinted by the Deseret News.
While President Russell M. Nelson was traveling to an assignment several years ago, the right engine of the plane he was on suddenly exploded. Flaming fuel spewed all over the right side, and the plane spiraled toward the earth. I expected to die. President Nelson, narrating the experience in a video message published Palm Sunday, March 28th. Miraculously, the dive extinguished the fire. The pilot restored power to the other engine and made a safe landing. And President Nelson made it to his assignment on time.
And the final reference that I could find for this was on the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints official webpage entitled President Nelson and the Burning Falling Airplane. Here, have a listen.
In this video,
President Russell M. Nelson shares an experience that could have been terrifying. He thought he was going to he felt perfectly calm. It's not that he didn't care about living, he just understood that death isn't the end. More importantly, he was prepared to meet his maker. We should all aspire to that kind of faith. Having an eternal perspective means remembering that the hardships, losses, pain, and suffering of life are brief in comparison to all eternity. Be patient with yourself, says President Nelson. Don't demand things that are unreasonable, but demand of yourself improvement. As you let the Lord help you through that, He will make the difference. I'm so grateful for the gospel of Jesus Christ that allows me that kind of strength in these tumultuous times.
That last account is short on details and more about the spiritual nature of the flight. Now, why does any of this matter? I'm definitely glad that you asked. In 2021, a researcher found a copy of an FAA and Civil Aeronautics Board report that refers to the flight in question. This board report was digitized by Google and is available to anyone out there. Let's read what that board report has to say about this doomed flight.
Incident occurred November 11, 1976, involving Piper PA-31 and 74985. Pilot experienced rough engine on scheduled flight between Salt Lake City and St. George. 3 passengers on board. Engine was feathered and precautionary landing made at Delta, Utah, per instructions in company manual. Investigation revealed cylinder base studs sheared. As a result of occurrence, SkyWest changed maintenance procedures by checking torque studs at each 100-hour inspection. No damage to aircraft, no injuries to crew or passengers.
And that's it, folks, the legendary flight of death. In this episode of the Mormon News Roundup, we've critically examined the veracity of President Russell M. Nelson's legendary flight of death story. There are significant inconsistencies between his narrative and the official board report, raising serious questions. Notably, as the years go by, the legend seems to grow more dramatic. Yet no one has ever corroborated this account. Not the pilot, not the passengers, not anybody else. This episode has delved deep into what it means for our prophet to embellish the truth. As we're wrapping things up, I should note that the folks over there at Mormonism Live have conducted a thorough deep dive into this topic, uncovering even more details.
Too often, LDS church leaders tell fabricated, false faith-promoting stories, and they often obscure the details. They won't tell you the family, won't tell you the elder's name. We don't get the details enough that we can show that the story isn't what it claimed to be.
And we see in real time here how miracle stories can be changed in order to make them reflect changes in culture, changes in technology. If we take the story at face value, which I'm guessing that listeners are probably starting to have questions about, there's no miracle here. There's a bad thing that happened on an airplane and a quick thinking pilot who solved the problem and managed to save the plane from catastrophe. But there's no miracle that really happens here.
It's not real. He made it up.
I want to thank you so much for watching another episode of the Mormon News Roundup. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share. Always think celestial, and remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.